introduce ourselves. Hey, so I'm Dylan Kistler from Ashland High School.
I'm Tia Wilhelm.
Nice to meet you.
And we're here from Rogue News at Ashland High School interviewing people at the Ashland Film Festival. So we just saw your movie called Whose Streets about protest and community involvement following the Ferguson shooting. So yeah, would you care to introduce yourself and just tell us really briefly kind of a general outline of what you did working on the movie?
Yeah, my name's Lucas Alvarado-Farrar, and I was the cinematographer and creative producer for Whose Streets. Yeah.
Cool. All right. And on a day-to-day basis, what were the main things that you were doing involved with making the movie? Because obviously it looks like it's pretty complex. So for people that don't make a lot of movies, what are all the kinds of jobs that you had to take on?
Yeah, so the movie started with Sabah and I went down to Ferguson, St. Louis, really, in September of 2014. And at the time, we were doing kind of a combo piece where I would take photos and she would write. We did that for a little bit until we realized that film was really the only way that we could communicate all the ideas that we had around what was happening and really show the full display of what you see in the film. So we ended up teaming up with Damon, the other director, in early 2015, and that really allowed us to expand. But as far as like day-to-day work, there's a lot of different pieces, and like technically there's a lot of different things that go on. But yeah, I was running 2 cameras and sound for about 4 months before we got more significant funding and help. So yeah.
It sounds kind of exhausting, all those things, yeah. One thing I was reflecting on while watching the movie is the fact that, I mean, we all live in very different places in the United States, right? And in Ashland, we live in an interesting community in that people seem to be very accepting, and they like have a lot of celebrate diversity bumper stickers and kinds of things, but they don't really live with diversity, and they don't really, it's hard to say that they treat race relations well because they don't have a lot of race relations, if that makes any sense. Like at our high school, there really just aren't a lot of minorities in general. So what are things that people from a community like Ashland that doesn't have a lot of diversity, how can we make ourselves more aware citizens, or how can we be ready to, to be good to people when we go out and encounter diverse communities when we maybe haven't grown up with them, or even just how to make the U.S. a better, more accepting place when we don't encounter that as much in our own community, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of homogenous or more leading homogenous communities across the U.S., right? And I think it's less about worrying so much about, what do I do when this happens, and just learning how to, like, look inside of yourself and think about, like, who are you, right? And, like, owning your history, thinking about, like, whether that's immediate family history or larger town history or regional history or national history, right? Really thinking about, like, where you fit in that timeline and reflecting on what led to you to be able to have the life that you have, right? So the more that you're conscious and aware of that, the less likely you are to have to like worry about how am I going to act in a certain situation, because you'll meet someone at the point where you're at, right? And you're going to have to learn lessons, and you're going to trip, and you're going to fall, and you're going to make mistakes, and like you could say something that really hurts somebody. But just always being self-reflexive and always really analyzing the moments where you do make mistakes, right? And being ready to face those straight on and not look away, right? And really be able to think about how the mistakes that you make impact people on a broader level than just maybe like messing up someone's name or saying something that you don't realize is offensive.
So how did you get into making this film, and also what really inspires you to keep doing this work?
Yeah, I got involved because I've just witnessed my lifetime of state repression and police violence, and that's nothing really new. My family's from Honduras, and it's a different context, right? You see more of the imperial or colonial context of the fact that the U.S. essentially ran Honduras and most of Latin America as a colony. So in the town where my family was from, the town was split in half between Honduran citizens and American or European white citizens. So that history has been involved in my whole life. So translating that to the U.S. situation, which replaces maybe Honduran or Latin people with black people and the history of slavery, it mirrors it very similarly. It's not the same thing, of course, but it has very similar structures and functions, and the way it operates is very similar. This is something that I've been looking at my whole life, right? And so, but right immediately before this, I was working in development with Sabah, the director, on a project around recidivism and what that looks like when people get out of prison, and how to effectively get people to not reoffend. So we're working on a photo and written piece, much like how Whose Streets started, and then Mike Brown was killed and Ferguson erupts, and we just figured out a way to get down there and be a part of it, then continue to make footage and film out of that.
When I hear about all this state repression and stuff, it seems like it's going to be difficult to change when you think about how underrepresented minorities are, and even, women make up more than half our population and are grossly underrepresented in like Congress and the Senate. We haven't ever had a woman president, and it seems really difficult when our government isn't very representative of the kinds of people in the country to have it like care for the needs of those people. When there are like so few blacks in Congress and the Senate, it's like how do you think we can add an urgency to making things better when that's still a reality in our country?
Yeah, I think that this film helps to sort of answer some of those questions, which is that the power really isn't in the hands of the majority of the population. So, it's about being in community with each other, being able to support each other, and that's, you're splitting like pennies to hopefully make $1, right? But like, that's how it has to be right now, and that means eventually gaining maybe more systemic power, and hopefully changing the way the system works, period. But in the meantime, you really have to figure out how to support the people around you, and really be there to be caring and support people.
What do you think it is about film that writing and photography couldn't capture and forced you to take that avenue?
Yeah, it's just the story was so much more dynamic than felt that we could represent in like one image or a series of photo essay, or there's something more powerful about seeing it play out on film. And it also allowed us to involve people in the community, showing their footage and from their perspective in a way that like weaving that into a written piece wouldn't necessarily do. We're just trying to be more expansive and create more of like a visceral feel, right? So you walk away from the film feeling something that you wouldn't necessarily get from a photo essay. Also, people don't like sit down and read like 5,000 word pieces, so there are plenty of good books about what happened, though. Wesley Laurie wrote one, so there's a lot of good books. So if you're interested in reading about something, that exists as well.
So I was wondering, I heard you speaking earlier about how this wasn't maybe as much about convincing people that didn't think it was a big issue or weren't siding with the Ferguson community. It wasn't about like bringing those people over to your side per se. And I know you were saying the idea of sides is dangerous in itself, really. But it sounds like maybe you're more concerned about solidarity, or like you were just saying, organization and community, and like making the group of people that are aware of the issue, making them like hyper aware, or really coming together and being strong together. Is that true, or do you also see this as kind of working both ways in that?
I guess it's not necessarily that that we don't want other people to be interested in, but that's not the focus, right? The focus is on supporting community and really allowing people to feel strong and empowered in the fact that they do have a voice, right? So it's less about like trying to convince people. If they get convinced in the process, all the better, right? But yeah, no, it's much more about bringing people back together that have been factionalized over the last hundreds of years, but specifically in the last 30 to 40 years since they murdered all of the civil rights leaders and then introduced crack into neighborhoods, right? And so there's this war on drugs. It's fractionalized a lot of communities, and now it's about bringing community back to the forefront and really being able to support each other. And like, look, a lot of people have a lot of resources, right? And it's about figuring out what resources you can bring to the table, whatever that is. So a lot of the time people ask like, well, what can we do? And it's like, well, what do you do? Like, do you do you sew? Like, you can sew coats, you can fix people's clothes, right? Like, do you grow food? Okay, well, people need to eat, right? So there's a lot of things that you can look, or like for me, right? I make film, so this is what I did, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do that your skill set will lend to in order to like create that community. And I think people are really looking at, it's not necessarily like DIY, but it is like you are doing it yourself with other people and really figuring out how to amplify and create teams and get back the power.
Yeah. It's interesting looking at, we're living in some really tumultuous times, and I'm thinking about, too, there are other communities like the Native American community at Standing Rock, and I'm sure that with all the community work you've done and everything, it's probably disappointing to see that all just get like taken out by the new administration and see those sort of community efforts ending. So is there anything that you feel like you've learned about our country as a whole from looking deeply into this particular struggle, about our country as a whole, from the politics and the elections and the other struggles that are going on? Is there any way you could sort of summarize the way our country's moving, the struggles it's having through your more specific experience?
Yeah, I would just invite people to think about it more broadly than the election results of November 8th, which is that the history that millions of people have known what is going on, that Trump represents for the entire history of the United States, right? It's not like yesterday that the Native Americans were killed by the millions, right? That didn't happen like recently. So, and it's not recently that slavery like these things have happened for over the course of hundreds of years. So a lot of it isn't really new. And I'm glad that a lot of people are being introduced to seeing how difficult and poorly the system treats people, right? And how difficult it makes people's lives. And the fact that Trump is galvanizing a broader, spectrum of people to be involved in that resistance is really important. But it's also important to step back, and if this is like the first time that you've been mad in your whole life, that you really step back and think about the people that have been mad for 30, 40, 50, 60 years or their entire life, and really putting them first and allowing them to explain maybe situations that you're just getting introduced to, and being able to step back and listen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate getting to hear from you. Thank you.